All right, we're up on that. Read her out. Morning, YouTube folks.
How's it going on YouTube?
That. Get on here. Get to. Yeah, they moved everything into this one box. All right, record. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot Podcast here on Hawk Fanatic. I am laughing because Zoom changed its interface and I updated this morning and I'm having trouble finding things for this podcast. I am Rob Howe, joined by Scott Docterman from The Athletic. Thursday, June the 27th, a little bit before 9:30 a.m. Scott and I got to talking before we started recording, so we apologize for the late start, but here we are. Scott, what the hell happened to June?
Man,
It just was a blur.
it happens every year, and I think it gets worse and worse. I mean,
I
the
know.
more it's like I really want some calm Junes, and we haven't had many lately. And now with recruiting just completely, I mean, this is the main recruiting month that you're just like, I used to think that there's like a 6 week window of summer, which was the 3 weeks before the 4th of July and 3 weeks after. And now that window is shrunk to where, damn, next week's the 4th of July. Dang.
Yeah. And it's crazy to think that, the guys that came back at the beginning of this month or arrived as freshmen are almost through the June conditioning already. And they're seven
Exactly.
on sevens. And then they get a little bit of a break and then come back in July. And we've got Big Ten Media Day in Indianapolis. And then their training camp starts. It's really amazingly close. I'm sure others out there haven't been paying attention, but it snuck up on me.
We have had, I mean, you want to talk about news for the last, well, pretty much 4 years, but, really, even this year, with the way, when you're talking about Brian getting pushed out, the OC hiring situation, then then it happened. Then you had Caitlin Clark, and then the Caitlin Clark residue after the Caitlin Clark experience through the postseason that went all the way to the championship game, her draft, all the fervor over it, and then Lisa Bluter retiring. And now it's like, we're in full force recruit mode. There's really been no let up. There hasn't been that week like, wow, what do we talk about? I mean, it's just now and again, we're a month away from football starting. It's just this happens too quick, man.
We're getting there. We're going to talk some football. We'll definitely talk a lot of recruiting. Women's basketball, as Scott mentioned, added a couple of assistant coaches yesterday on Wednesday, June the 26th. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Probably a good place to start is with the current football team and situation. You may have heard us talk about the wide receiver position on this podcast before. It is certainly an area that people focus on. It is the area that I think beyond quarterback is most in need of development and production on the Iowa football program. And arguably, wide receiver one likely will miss at least one game. We'll see beyond that, and that's what we'll talk about here. But Caleb Brown arrested early Sunday morning for an OWI and possession of fake identification. He is 20 years old, so not legally of age to buy alcohol. Some other details on this, Scott: damage to his vehicle. You never know how Kirk is going to view these things. And Caleb had a transgression last season. And I've said this on the podcast. I know some of you know what it was, but I don't want to drag him through, and I don't want to litigate that because it was already dealt with in-house, punished. He moved on. We've talked about him growing from that. Now we have another situation, another growing experience, Scott, and thankfully nobody was hurt. That's always the thing you worry about with this. It could have been a lot worse, and Caleb, hopefully, if anything comes out of this, he realizes that he dodged a big-time bullet here.
Yeah, you get a trip to jail that should shake you up. I mean, no matter who you are, and that's what you get with an OWI in Iowa or in most places. So I think in his case, first of all, it's never a good thing. OWI, drunken driving. In today's world, it's even worse in some ways than it was in ours, because now and especially being an athlete like him, there's a couple of reasons why it looks worse than maybe it would have in the 90s, for instance. First of all, everybody knows who you are, and there's social media everywhere. Second of all, you are so you're a public figure, but then you also have Uber. We didn't have Uber, and with NIL you have money, so it's not like you got to scab a ride from somebody to go home, or oh well, shoot, I can't find anybody. You can Uber somebody to come pick you up from the bar or whatever, and unfortunately chose the worst option of all, and that is to drive drunk. And while it's a horrendous thing, I don't necessarily get self-righteous about this. I've never had one, but
I have.
just
I got one when I was 19, and it was foolish, and I learned my lesson, because Caleb will realize now, trying to get your license back and paying the fines and going through the process, going to classes, all of those things, it's not enjoyable, and he will not enjoy it. I did not enjoy it, and I learned my lesson.
Yeah, lots of people. Just about every one of my friends had one. A lot of people I know and love have had one. And yes, going through the process, going to driver's classes if they require it, and going and paying, ultra high insurance, especially because there was damage to his vehicle. That's all gonna, and now damage to his reputation. It's not like us, just a dumb college kid making a stupid mistake. You're a high profile athlete in a college town, then that sticks to you. That's something that in a couple of years, when he goes to the combine or goes through the draft process, people will ask him about it, and he'll have to recall it. And so all of that to me stems from, but I will say that college kids make stupid mistakes. So you've got to kind of rely on that and understand that, okay, nobody got hurt. Remember, it was a few years ago now, I'm almost 4, but, Amir Smith-Marset, the night after a game that they lost, and he had his Charger, and he was driving, 70 miles an hour, and got pulled over. You got a 1-game suspension for that, which I would argue, from the way that one sounded, was one of the more dangerous situations, 2:00 in the morning, out on Burlington, like corner of Burlington and Riverside, I think it was, somewhere around in there, driving that fast. That's pretty damn dangerous. So my guess is, not to say that the fake ID part of it is just fake ID part of it. He'll have to pay the fine and do whatever for that. But I think in this case, the 1-game suspension, if he does the right things this summer, but it means that it sets him back and the passing game back,
Yeah, and he's going to have in-house punishment too that we won't learn of, most likely. But so it's not for folks that are just like, he only gets once a game suspension. He has plenty of other hurdles to clear before he gets back on, things that will be required of him within the program itself, and then the university athletic department codes and all those other things that come into play. And it's a shame that, you have to learn lessons this way, but, I thought about it too. And you think about, oh, he should have taken an Uber or a taxi or called a friend or something like that. I don't know how drunk the kid was. And my guess is he probably wasn't thinking clearly, which is why he did something stupid like this, which is another example of, was he by himself? Were there other people? With a lot of details we don't know about this, what could have prevented it, but it happened. And now we look at what the ramifications are. Illinois State game 1, if you can't beat Illinois State without Caleb Brown, it could be a really long season in Iowa City. So now if it goes to 2, that's a whole different story, right? Because now you're playing Iowa State, and you're gonna conceivably, you need him, or having him is a big deal in a game like that. I'm with Scott. I think it's 1 game, but I don't want to lock into that. And I'm not saying Scott's doing that either. We have precedent. The Amir Smith-Marset, I think Jamari Harris got one a couple of years. Was that the last one, Jamari Harris, in 2022? I think it was. And he got 1 game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of been the universal ban on for
Tristan got,
football.
Worf's
Yeah,
got one on the scooter.
yeah,
That was a one game.
yeah.
So it's been pretty consistent for the last almost 10 years that it's been one game. I don't know how they look at I don't know if the fake ID adds into it. I don't know if what he did last year adds into it or if that's, water under the bridge. It's already been dealt with. I don't know if there's a strike rule, like how many times you have, you know, missteps and off field issues, if there's like a cumulative effect. That's stuff we don't know.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, yeah. I think dealing with this. I mean, if he was to go out and let's say at the end of July go out and get dinged for something else, then I think there's the cumulative effect. I do think it should be separate. There hasn't been a show of anything that he seems mature. When we talk to him, I know there are some players who aren't quite as mature. I know early in their careers, I remember a few that got a 2-game suspension, when they were really young, like a freshman or even a sophomore or something. And more of it has been things like, when you build equity in the program, then they take that into it. I think in this case, it's unless there was something that we don't know
Yeah.
involved, like he refused to ride and everybody said he was drunk. And, and that stuff we just don't know. We're not privy to those discussions, and I hate to speculate, and I probably shouldn't have just there, but I think it's, it sounds like a 1-game suspension. And again, this is a taboo subject in the 80s and 90s, really up until about the mid 90s. Yeah, you would get dinged, but a lot of times it would be like, hey, can you have somebody else take you home, or just park your car? Let's get out of here, that type of thing, or even the cops would take you home. Of course, that's not going to happen now, and probably shouldn't. That's why a lot of people died back then. So I think 1 game sounds fair. What it means for the Iowa offense, though, is now you're taking arguably, receiver number 1 out of the lineup in a unit that needs as much work, especially against probably their most beatable opponent, the easiest opponent on their schedule. That this was a way to work through some things, and now they won't. And he'll be picking up trash in Cedar County or something for that day.
Yeah, and it elevates, I think we were in agreement, Scott, and we've talked about receivers on the pod earlier that, as Caleb Brown, Seth Anderson, Caden Weechin were your top 3 coming in. So that obviously elevates the other 2 into more prominent roles. And I'm not saying that, there weren't going to be games where Weechin or Anderson would outperform or outproduce Caleb Brown. But if you're going into a game as the other team and you're identifying Iowa's playmakers at that position, I think Caleb Brown is at the top of your scouting report. The other guys, that's not to diminish the other guys. So now you've got 2 available in week 1. Maybe you get a benefit by getting Howard more reps or Bowie more reps. I don't know what Moda's, I know he was hurt in the spring. I don't know where he is at physically now, but he's another guy that's a possibility. Alec Wick has experience in the program. You've got 2 guys, KJ Parker's coming in. Reese Vanderzee's playing baseball this summer, so he won't be here until after the high school baseball season. So he's a little bit behind as well. But it's not like you're flush with other options at that proven options. I should say proven options at that position, Scott.
Yeah, and TJ Washington.
Yeah, TJ Washington. I keep forgetting him moving over from running.
Yeah, but the good thing is that if there's something that can mask this, and it will all year long, is that they have 2 great tight ends.
Yeah. And a pretty good stable of running backs.
Yeah. So they'll be able to run 12 personnel. They'll probably run 12 as their primary, which they should when you have Luke Lachey, and provided he's, 100%, he's as good as there is in the country. So, and Addison Ostrenga played pretty well too. And they're kind of moving on from fullback. I'm sure they'll have it a few times, but you want to have your full complement of receivers. But when you
said, it would be an opportunity to work on. You don't want to. I'm not trying to disrespect Illinois State, but if you get a little bit of a lead, maybe you work on some things with Caleb Brown in there.
Exactly, and And there's some people who may say, well, at least this means that Iowa State's not going to see anything, but that's neither here nor there. It's a little bit overblown when you start to say that stuff.
So we'll see how this shakes out. It's not a position of strength. It wasn't before Caleb Brown got arrested. It isn't now. If it is the one game, you just hope it doesn't impact Iowa, even if he comes back in week 2 and you're like, well, if we would have had him week 1 and we could have worked through some things, just maybe he runs a route, a different depth of a route or something in week 2 that could have been worked out in week 1. Those are the type of things that you miss out on. But it is what it is. It's done now. He's got to go through this process. He's not going to enjoy it, as I said. Iowa has time to adjust at least for week 1, and you just hope it doesn't have a long-term effect either on Caleb or the team. And we'll see how it lays out. The offense is something we all have our eye on going into the season. Got a couple questions here in the chat room, and we don't have a ton to talk about today, so why not? Because these seem to come up throughout here. This is Llama Power Hawkeye in the YouTube chat room. Scott, would you two agree that George Barnett seems to be a protected coordinator under Kirk Ferentz? Well, he's a position coach. He's not a coordinator. We'll make that distinction. Do the fans and the team need to be worried that KF keeps his buddies employed no matter what? Wouldn't it be nice if KF and John Buttermeyer utilize the portal and maybe grab 2 receivers they actually played last year instead of being lazy? So obviously Llama is not a fan of Kirk Ferentz, George Barnett, or recruiting. Any thoughts on those questions, Scott?
I'm not. Obviously, the offensive line play has struggled the last few years. We can agree to that.
Yep.
But show me Tristan Wirfs on this offensive line. Show me Alaric Jackson. Show me Tyler Linderbaum, who was there in 2021, his first year as offensive line coach. Then you start to say, okay, what about all the attrition of the players in the 18 and 19 and even 20 classes before he got there? The David Davidoffs. And then, Cody Ince was a really good player and couldn't play his senior year. Mark Kallenberger didn't go out his senior year. You've seen this attrition. And then last year, the number of injuries and stuff. And I'm not making excuses. I'm actually factoring in reasons. And then when you look at this offensive line and you think, they're a veteran unit. I think they'll be better. And I think schematics had an issue in some of the performance. Mason Richmond played basically last year with, as banged up as anybody in the team, and he still stuck it out as left tackle. He's a guard at the next level. He's playing left tackle out of need. David Davidoff is supposed to be that guy. He's not. Caden Proctor was supposed to be that guy. He bolted, right before spring practice started. It's in some ways that's not really George's fault. And I think the other part is he was running a scheme based on what Brian Ferentz wanted him to do. And they did adjust, and they looked a lot better when they were running gap blocking rather than zone. And part of that is because Iowa's scheme didn't adjust. When Kirk was talking a lot about cut blocking, and cut blocking has been basically legislated out of the game, because even if you execute a great cut block at the line of scrimmage, oftentimes you'll get flagged for it and there's no review, even if you're right. And they'll tell you, oops, we're sorry. That's it. So in order to do that, you have to adjust. And how have they adjusted? Well, sometimes when they incorporate motion, then that holds the second level strong. And year over year, last year, I think they averaged 3.4 yards per carry on a regular play. And then they averaged 5.3 when they incorporated jet sweep motion. So now you've got an offensive coordinator in Tim Lester, who incorporates motion on almost every snap. Therefore, the second level is going to get messed up in their fits. They're going to overrun. They're going to be hesitant in certain areas, which kind of provides the evener that the offensive line needed that they couldn't have when cut blocks. So what I look at is this year, how does this veteran offensive line perform, kind of giving even odds? This year is the key year for me with George Barnett. And I'm not going to, when Tristan Wirfs and Alaric Jackson were tackles, It doesn't mean that Tim Polasek was a great offensive line coach. He never did it before, but he had great talent there. And then you throw Tyler Linderbaum in there, and it's like, Jesus, this guy's got 3 NFL starters. Did he mold them? Did he develop them? Yeah, but they had starter kits. These guys don't. I mean, I think they're still playing kind of with 4 guards and a center. And Logan Jones was hurt, and then you throw on the quarterback, the issues with the passing game, and everybody's into the line of scrimmage. They were a numbers game. They can't block him. They know where the ball's going because there's no motion. There's a numbers game where they're basically blocking 7 on 9, and they don't have any kind of a counter punch because they can't cut block. So I'm giving Georgia a pass right now. This year will be different for me. This year will be more open to scrutiny from my vision. I think people just say, line sucks. Guy got a 1-yard gain. Well, what all happened? It's holistic. It's not just individual. And that's, to me, why you got to take it from a big picture rather than a narrow environment.
Yeah, Scott makes great points in terms of details and nuance to what the recent history is at the position. For me, with George Barnett, it's kind of the jury is still out. As Scott said, he's been been dealt some tough cards to play, but you have to be able to recruit. You should be able to, and you have to be able to recruit at a decently high level on the offensive line at Iowa. It's one of Iowa's signature positions. And I think that's what's got people freaked out I never expected Iowa's offensive line with Kirk Ferentz as the head coach to struggle as much as it has the last few years. Again, Scott gave you some details on why that is, but it can't keep going that way. And you have to, I think recruiting's gotten a little bit better at that position. So the guys that have come into the program the last couple of years, how did they develop? And now how does this group, as Scott said, this group has been developed by George Barnett. If it's healthy, granted, Jennings Dunker and Mason Richmond are guards if they play in the NFL. They're playing tackle here. That's a bit of that is not ideal, but you've developed them at that position. It's college football. It's not the NFL. They can hold their own at those positions. They have to be productive this year. Connor Colby has what do these guys have? Like 150 starts, Scott, together?
155.
Not playing together, but as a group.
155 for the group, and counting Bo Stevens and Tyler Ellsbury and guys like that. And
how much does that happen in college football anymore with people transferring and the NIL and leaving early for the NFL? It's a unique situation, which again, there's no reason this unit should not be successful.
Exactly. And, one of the things I talked to Tyler Barnes about when this, the most recent class signed back in December was he thinks that the current class coming in and the one that, entering the redshirt freshman year, he's like, I think now we're on a pace where this offensive line will look like how it should look like. And I think part of that is getting tackles, getting guys who can play tackle. And Iowa, I think, has done a nice job of mixing developmental projects, because everybody needs development, and guys who have, they can step in year 2 or 3 and be at the minimum rotational backup guys. And I think what we're seeing is some of that. I think Trevor Lauk is going to be probably a rotational guy this year, if not, second. And that, somebody like Cannon Leonard, purely development project. But if he's in 3 years, all of a sudden, wow, here he is. Maybe he's a guy that all he needed was 3 years worth of work. Then you've got a star. If not, well, you swung and you missed. That happens. So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Will Nolan and Cody Fox are badasses.
Yeah.
Those are the types of guys you get in your program. Those are the types of guys you get in here, and you develop and they become all Big Ten. That's those they have, like Scott was talking about, guys that come in with kind of a maybe advanced feel for the game, or developed, their development is advanced, whereas the guys we're talking about now, Jennings Dunker, Nick DeYoung, guys that have gotten to this point through development, guys that come in that are already more ready to play. Player ready plays. I don't know what the word I'm looking for here, but game ready, I would say, are guys like Cody Fox and Will Nolan, and even
Caslin,
and guys that were in these last couple classes. And I think this 25 class, which we'll get to after the break, some of the offensive linemen they're bringing in that have verbally committed to the 25 class are a continuation, I think, of what has been a good run recruiting wise over the last several cycles. So if you can maximize this group, Scott, which is a veteran group, you're behind the scenes developing another good group ready to step in. That's what you have to get back to. Developing behind guys and then continuing to plug in. Somehow Iowa, and you've mentioned some of the details, Iowa's lost its way in that regard recently, and that's been part of the problem. You're locked up. Can you see me? All right, you're back.
Yeah.
let me hit resume again. Hang on.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, a little technical difficulty there. Go ahead and roll, Scott.
All right. Well, I guess I just look at this unit as a way to. I think they're going to be better this year. I think they're going to look more representative of what you want. And Iowa has done well in the past when they've reached this point, when you have a unit, no matter how talented they are. And I think some people have, like Logan Jones and Connor Colby on a little bit of a pedestal to some extent, like, hey, these guys could be all Big Ten caliber, and they may be, but I also think of this group as one that should perform well. Like look at the 16 offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award, and you're saying, okay, Ike Butker came in as a tight end. Cole Croston was a walk-on. Boone Myers was there. Guys that he was a walk-on, but it took time for them to in the oven to bake themselves into a good unit. And now James Daniels is outstanding talent-wise. There's just no question about that. But some of the others takes time. So, and when you look at a Connor Colby in particular, who got forced in to start as a true freshman in 2021, was clearly not ready for that. But they had to play him. They couldn't play. I mean, Cody Ince was hurt, and he was an NFL caliber lineman. God rest his soul. But he, there you go. You're forcing guys in, and sometimes you think that, okay, if they're playing right away, that automatically become better. Well, yeah, he's gotten better, no question, but it's still not the same climb. I mean, he's basically entering, if you think about it, redshirt junior year, and he's going to be a senior on the offensive line, where they usually prefer a 5-year plan, not a 4. So I think this is but I do think Connor Colby can be one of the better linemen in the country by the end of this year.
Yeah, this is a situation, and this is not meant as disrespect for anybody on this offensive line, but you really want the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts here. And that extends to some of those guys, that have played, because there's experience behind those 5 too, of guys that have played. It extends to them as well. Whatever you need to do to get the best 5 in there, if somebody's not performing, there are some other guys that could step in that have experience. So yeah, I mean, that's what you need this group to perform well together. And again, it's one of those positions, the ultimate position for teamwork, right? For continuity, for chemistry, for working off of each other. It's such a specialized group in that each guy has to do his job, but then they have to do their job together. And that's what you hope that the experience pays dividends for Iowa because all of these guys know each other. They like each other. They're friends. That helps. And they're used to playing alongside of each other. All of those should be benefits this year.
Sure. And, the technique and the chemistry is so pivotal in any offensive line, but here even more so. I mean, when you're talking about running zone, you've got, a lot of times a double team at the point of attack. And then depending on which way you're going, you're either got a scoop block or a slip block, which is, one of the guys moves on to the second level. It's like hit immediately and then move. And you've got to have some sort of continuity there. And having all those injuries, first it limits you, and then it limits the chemistry. And I do think that now when you have a coordinator that uses motion as much as they do, that I think ultimately it allows for that slight hesitancy. And we talked to, I talked to some assistant coaches. I've talked to some of the the players, and even Jay Higgins admitted that it kind of forced them to have some issues. They missed their run fits at times, and they were a little hesitant. And and we're talking about one step, and the difference between one step is I got my I'm at my aiming point, I got my leverage, and I can push him in the direction I want to go and get vertical. Or I'm way behind, I got to make sure that I'm not holding. I got to make sure that I'm not, blocking him in the back. I got to just try to do as best I can to get in front of it. I mean, it's just such a different mindset. And so, again, I think it's fair to say the jury is still out on George. I think he's done a nice job with development. It's hard to say what he's done has he developed these guys enough? We'll see. But overall,
it's that question, right? Has he developed them to the maximum of their capability, what their potential is? It's so hard to quantify that, right? Like Connor Colby, if you look at his scholarship offer list, he was a really highly regarded kid, right? But the circumstances, he's thrown in before he gets a chance to develop, that can screw with your whole career, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the positive is you get thrown in there and you just take off. Sometimes it stunts your growth and it makes it more difficult to develop. So a lot of details and nuance to this too, that it's tough to just say it's George Barnett. It's tough to say it's the recruiting or the development or whatever. It's tough to pin down what the reason is. Ultimately, this unit needs to be better. He's the coach of the unit. If it's not better, it's on him.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think this year is somewhat of a referendum for him, at least from the public's eyes. I don't know. I can't speak to Kirk Ferentz. He's never really been one to, now they let go of Kelton Copeland this year. They have let go of coaches in the past, but he seems to be a strong supporter of George. George is getting good recruits now. And in the Chicagoland, there seems to be a receptiveness to him. And I like this class that's coming in right now that just arrived a lot. And I like the three guys right now who are committed in the next year's class. I also like David Davidkoff 3 years ago. And if he would have been left tackle the way that we expected him to be, or if they would have gotten instead of him, Joe Alt, I would have liked it too. But, I mean, you miss on guys and it does change the complexion of the offensive line as well.
I'm declaring this the summer of George Barnett. It's the summer of George. He's going to win everybody over. And
summer of George. I just think of George Costanza.
That's what I'm playing off the George Costanza because I'm
there's part of me thinking the summer of love of '67, and then there's flowers and psychedelics and stuff.
We've done our due diligence here, Scott. We've talked about wide receivers and offensive line, the biggest concerns for everybody that follows Iowa football. So good time to take a break, and we will come back and talk some recruiting and a little women's basketball when we do. But I first want to let folks know that support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited for the great work they've been doing in our community for over half a century. Certainly appreciate their support of the podcast. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors now. Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk some more Hawks. Hang tight. And we're back on the Hawkeye Hotspot Podcast here on Hawk Fanatic to let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights, we switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch. But what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch, right here in Iowa, can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Thank you to Chad Birch and all of our sponsors. We appreciate it. It helps us bring you these podcasts free of charge, and we get a little bit of support as well. So appreciate all of the sponsors. Scott, recruiting. Let's get into it. We talked about how big of a month this is for that. We've had a couple of weekends here in a row. The tailgater was 2 weekends ago, and that's for those that don't know. Those are underclassmen, kids, underclassmen. I said underclassmen.
Underclassmen.
The underclassmen, meaning junior year and under, come in for those a lot of times. Some of the top targets come in. It's a nice event where families get to mingle. It's a really good bonding experience and a good step along the way for the recruiting journey for Iowa and recruits that they're interested in those classes. And a lot of the guys that were here this past weekend also went through the tailgater the previous year, and then came back this past weekend for the official visit weekend. And that is dedicated to guys that will be seniors this year and will sign most likely in December, during the early signing period. But Iowa is now up to 12 commitments in this class, Scott. We're thinking probably mid-teens for this class, all things considered, with the availability of the transfer portal and where the roster is at now. But as we've talked about before, roster management never stops. It's daily. So just keep that in mind as well. But Iowa they had 4 guys since
let's see, Mason Woods, and then we've had
we talked about him last week,
okay.
Right? But yeah, you're right though. He officially visited, but he committed before his official visit started. Yeah. But so 5 guys out of the weekend, 4 that actually committed after experiencing the visit, and they include Brad Fitzgibbon, a defensive lineman from Chicago Marist, played with John Nestor there, like him a lot. Lucas Algier, who some folks like as a defensive player, but a really good athletic, high ceiling type offensive lineman from St. Louis. Cam Herron, an interior offensive lineman, again. Some coaches liked him on defense. I like his defensive film a ton too. Think he could make it there, and who knows? You never know how things are going to transpire once he gets to campus. Nice having that option, but he could be a kick-ass guard. And then Charles C.J. Bell from Connecticut. I think he's originally from Massachusetts, but he attends St. Thomas More, which is a prep school in Oakdale, Connecticut. I was shopped there in the past. Real good get. 6'1", long, lanky corner. Watched his film. Really smooth movements. Had some high-end scholarship offers. I don't know if those were still committable at the time. They were offered pretty early, but those schools saw something in CJ Bell that led them to offer, whether they had filled their class at his position by the time he was ready or not. A lot of circumstances go into that. I'm talking a lot here, rambling about recruiting information that nobody cares about. But 4 guys, Scott, on the weekend, 5 total, up to 12. What say you about this class overall, where it sits right now? And then we can talk about some specific guys.
I think it's a nice class right now. I think they've got a good mix. There are some areas but I also think that there are, for me, 2 players sitting out there that are like they're batting 3rd and 4th in this lineup. They're clean up and then they're move the base runners and
really can change the complexion of this class.
Obviously, Yosei Epineza is a home run, no question. And then Terrence Smith, I think, is also in that same ballpark because he's been moved up to a 4-star. He's a phenomenal talent. And now it's just a matter of
more important for Iowa.
More important for Iowa.
For Iowa. Not who's the better player. Or
Terrence
who's the
Smith.
better. Yeah, I might agree. And Yosei's
it's not. I don't want to say that he's not more important.
I'm trying to illustrate how important Terrence Smith is more than to disparage Epinesa. How important Terrence Smith is for this current Iowa team.
He's a guy that if you give a little bit more in his NIL when he comes, because now that he's a 4-star and he's a tremendous talent in basketball and track as well as football.
So so athletic.
He's from Aurora. That's 2.5 hours depending on how you drive. And to have faith in your program that was the worst offense in the Big Ten for so many years, to say, I believe in you guys. I believe this is going to get better. That says a lot. And he seems to be the only receiver that they're going to take if they get him at least out of this. The transfer portal may bring other gifts later in the year. But, yeah, right. But I think that's why they're going light right now. But, to me, that would send a message that would be like, don't be afraid of Iowa. We're making changes. We're getting better. And also, they've built a great relationship with them. And they have, an A+ recruiter in the Chicagoland and Seth Wallace that was on him early. And now they've really, it's going to be tough. And it's, and the part, the most difficult part isn't, to me, if he picks Iowa next week, let's say, and has fireworks on the 4th of July and they're black and gold, it's what happens if he blows up in the fall and Notre Dame comes calling, or Michigan or somebody like that.
Yeah.
That to me is where it gets really difficult, but you get your hooks into him, you stay with him, you go over and knock on his door as often as you can, and voila. So.
Yeah, no doubt. And for those that don't know, he's a tall, athletic receiver that Iowa has lacked really since Brandon Smith, I think. And I think Terrence Smith probably has a higher ceiling than Brandon Smith, but you still have to come and do it. And Brandon was dealt some tough cards in his time at Iowa too that probably stunted his production. In fact, I know it stunted his production. And but that's the type of guy that you want here. And just adding a little sauce to the story, PJ Fleck is involved here. So that's always interesting because I'm not sure, Scott, you could have a different recruiting approach than what Minnesota and Iowa have.
It's funny. We're doing this Kansas City confidential like we did the Chicago one. And I talked to a coach last night in the Kansas City area, and it's kind of similar in some ways between Eli Drinkwitz and Lance Leipold, and kind of like PJ and Kirk and Matt Campbell when you throw him in there, because he's kind of in the middle of both of them. And
then you got Kleiman too, who is more like Kirk.
Yeah.
And and that more straightforward, honest approach, if I can.
Right. And this is where it comes down to preference and fit.
Yeah.
If you want the rah PJ type, he's perfect for you. Some people really love that. That's what they want. He gets them riled up and they'll swear by him. Some people, it just doesn't fit their personalities. Can you imagine Jack Campbell playing for PJ Fleck. No, not in a million years. He prefers, now Dan Campbell can somewhat get that way, but he's not that way. But Kirk Ferentz is more his style. And I think that's part of it as well, that as the athlete, you got to find which program, which coach fits your personality best. And then, of course, then you figure in offense, and, Minnesota has more production. They have a first-round receiver in recent years, and Rashad Bateman, and Tyler Johnson was really good, and some other players. And Iowa can point to, hey, we still got a guy in the NFL, and Amir Smith-Marset, and Brandon Smith had some touchdowns.
Who was committed to Minnesota?
He was
Amir.
for like
and
a
he
day.
has a really good story about that recruitment.
Yeah, exactly. There's some really.
That's almost like the main example of the differences between the recruiting approaches. Amir is if you were going to write a story about the two, like Minnesota, Iowa rivals, on the field and in recruiting, and this is their approach, Amir would be a great source for that.
I mean, some of the things that he does is makes people uncomfortable, no question, but it also inspires them. So, you have to get that way, when you're talking about these, these two types of systems. And then again, if Iowa was to somehow secure his recruitment, you've got to keep recruiting him. You got to recruit him all the way through signing day. And then if he comes on campus and he's really good, you got to continue to recruit him then, because, hey, he as a freshman, he posts 32 catches or something like that. Then it's like, hey, look at us, we'll give you $100,000 more and come our way.
And Aurora is closer to here, but as Scott said, it is a heavily recruited area because it's so close to Chicago. And if you come in to recruit the Chicago area, it's pretty easy to get to Aurora and see this kid. So Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, go down the list of teams that can come in and recruit that area heavily. A verbal commitment is great in the summer, but you got to finish it. You got to go 6 months. It's a long race, and I doubt Minnesota will stop on the kid. And if he has a massive senior year, they're going to come calling, because as we talked about, roster management wise, there are injuries, guys going into the transfer portal that opens up. Then there become openings at some of those other programs that may not need a receiver now, but they get into October and November and they're like, okay, we're definitely losing so-and-so to the NFL. This guy's going to the transfer portal. I'm talking about the Blue Bloods. And this is what happens. And then they poach guys like Terrence Smith. And that's not putting into question Terrence Smith's, his character. It's just, it's the recruiting process. It's intense. And even when they sign now, that doesn't mean they can't leave. If they go through a spring or something and they don't like it, they can just go. So it's nonstop roster management. But those are the two big ones out there that Scott said. Jose Epinesa, defensive lineman from Edwardsville, Illinois. You guys know his family history. His two brothers went here. His dad went here. I like Iowa's chances. And then Terrence Smith, who's obviously a huge piece of this. But talking about a few of the guys that they did get, Scott, any of these guys pop out to you? I know it was interesting. I interviewed Brad Fitzgibbon. Again, I'm putting S's on words that don't have S's, like underclassmen's. But I interviewed Brad in early April. He visited here, didn't have an offer. Really connected with the kid. He's just a really down-to-earth kid who gets it. And did a story on him. And then I offered about a month later. I did another story on him. So I've gotten to do a few stories on him. It was cool when he visited this past weekend. He had his sister, who's a gymnast at Illinois, come with him on this visit because she had been through the recruiting process. And he's like, I really want, her name's Caden Fitzgibbon, and brought her in with his parents and went through, and she gave it the thumbs up. She's like, yeah, this is it. And I think he had an idea he wanted to come here coming into the weekend. He had Northwestern and Kansas as his other finalists.
Michigan State too, right?
Michigan State, my bad. Michigan State and Kansas. I keep throwing Northwestern in there. But I think he went to visit Northwestern and he's from that area. But just this is a kid I think, who could play early.
Mhm.
He's physical, technically sound. I've watched his highlights several times and just really think he fits well here off the field, mindset, on the field. I think this is a guy who's primed for success here, Scott.
Another Southside Sid from Marist.
Yep.
You've got there's a lot to like here. I kind of watched him early when he started to have some interest, and I looked at his video. And this is, if they can land Terrence Smith, this could be one of the best hauls from the Chicagoland area in the last 19, 20 years. And that's what you want. And kind of piggybacking off the Chicago Confidential that I did, that Iowa has filled a vacuum that was vacated by Michigan State and a lot of Wisconsin too, where they used to be really in on all the same guys, even Northwestern to some extent. They were all in.
Khalil Tate was a big one last year for Iowa, beating Wisconsin there.
Right.
For that.
And, Seth has done an amazing job in the Chicagoland area, and it's not easy. I talked to Seth about it and wrote a story that, they went into Chicago, and at first, they kind of divided up. And then they decided, you know what, rather than have people stepping on each other's toes and doing all that sort of stuff, let's just go ahead and put one person there. And he described it as overwhelming, but it also is kind of liberating that you can go in there and do all this stuff. And he's widely regarded as the best recruiter in Chicago right now by the majority of coaches we talk to. And when you look at the haul that they've gotten there, and I specifically with Fitzgibbon, perfect type of Iowa play. There's some players that jump out at you and say that's an Iowa player, and he's one of them. Physical, tough, big, relentless, got room to grow. I mean, I could see him, he's like already like 280. I could see him at 300 by basically cutting 10 pounds and gaining 30. And he has no neck. Yeah, I mean, he's just
very little neck.
Somebody on Twitter compared him to Louis Trinket-Passat, and I'm like, yeah, but he has more upside than Louis did.
Taller than Louis too.
Yeah, exactly.
Louis wasn't 6'4", was he?
No. He was like 6'1", something like that. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't know if I want to go there with that, but maybe by the end of his career,
Yeah.
But I and the other part is, and you cannot underestimate this, it's not lip service. I mean, the guy carries like a 4.6 grade point average at Marist, which is a challenging school. And when you have somebody that's a high academic achiever, it means they put a lot of effort into it, which means they care. They're smart. They're intelligent. Not only are they intelligent, but they've got a committed work ethic on and off the field. So I love this pick for Iowa. He was one that I'm like, yeah, you want this guy on your team because he has the character. He just looks like he walks in, he's going to fit right in, and then he's going to be a leader by his third or fourth year. And
you know who he reminds me of a little bit?
Who's that?
Aaron Graves.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want to go
just from an academic standpoint, just kind of very focused on what he needs to do in the classroom and on the field, and puts time into it, and just one of those people you look at and you're like, damn, I suck. I'm not doing anything compared to what these guys are doing. And Aaron Graves going to junior college, taking stuff like that. He reminds me a little bit of Aaron.
Aaron Graves getting his AA before he got his high school diploma. He got a 4.0. And he's already got his degree at Iowa in 2 years.
I know, it makes you just feel like you're useless. I'm like, I'm writing the story today.
I mean, you look at this kid, you're just like, and I know it's not recruiting, but Aaron Graves to do what he has done in his life at age 20, to in the same day to go stick a kid in the state quarterfinals at state, and then at night I'm going to score 33 points in a district tournament game and get a 4.0 and graduate Iowa Central Community College before you graduate from high school, and then go. I mean, my God. But, among the other ones, I think Cam Herron, what I like about him is he's really a good mover, and he's an earth grade. He's like just a really good, he looks the part to me, guard, same school. So in some ways it's maybe I'm making too easy a comparison with Justin Britt before.
Somebody threw that out to me yesterday. I see it.
Yeah. The thing I like with Cameron Herron is his power. I mean, I think you can't teach how to hit with power. It's a short range type of thing. And so I really like that. I do think, though, the jewel of the weekend is Luke Allgaier. And, he can play on both sides, and getting somebody from St. Louis is not easy, especially now with Mizzou just really owning that area. And that area now is SEC territory. So,
Yep.
and Kansas State has really come a force. And I know that was his other one. And so St. Louis is a very difficult area, but they're able to go in there and get a guy that, he can play either side of the ball, but he's got the movement and he's got the ability to, to play tackle. And Iowa needs tackle prospects. And again, you can't teach what he has. And so I think that's something that, we'll look at, as far as CJ Bell goes, long, lanky, you never go wrong there. Iowa's, I'm glad that they're kind of diversifying their class a little bit. It kind of worried me that, hey, you're getting all kinds of linebackers and you're getting kind of safety types, but tight ends. Now it's, you're getting a corner, but the rest of the class, there's several there. There's a couple from Florida, Christian Hudson, who's going to commit here pretty soon, I think in the next week or so. And I don't know as much about that one. If it's going to be, it looks like it's more of a toss up. You'd like to get Josh, Gurrier, is that how you pronounce it?
Guerrier or something like that. I think it's Guerrier. I interviewed him back in the winter or spring. He likes Iowa.
Yeah. And, now the kicker one is, to me,
I wrote about him last night. I interviewed him yesterday.
So he's going to wait.
Starzik.
Yeah, Starzik. Scott, hey, it's a good name for a good first name. But I saw he's waiting until August to commit. And to me,
he wants to commit by early August.
Okay. So there's part of me that kind of wonders is he trying to come on, somebody in Texas, come on, this is your chance. I'm giving you some opportunity. And, so.
He has offers right now, reported offers from Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Syracuse, Oklahoma, and Iowa. So he's the number one ranked kicker in the country by Coles. There's also Sailor kicking. I'm not sure what he is on that, but there seems to be, depending on who you kick for and which camp you work for, that's who ranks you, which is kind of weird. Kickers, like one service doesn't rank the guys who are in the other camp, whatever. Yeah. But his quote to me, Scott, was, Iowa was a great experience, and I'm looking forward to making my final decision by early August. Yeah. Now, he's camped at Alabama. That may be you may be onto something. It might be like Texas, but he's got Texas A&M. But it could be one of those schools, but it also could be like an Alabama or somebody like that he's waiting on too.
Yeah, and A&M, he hasn't taken it. He took an official to Syracuse. He took official to Iowa.
But he's visited those other schools like in the spring and summer for camps. Like he was at Oklahoma for a camp when he got his offer. So he hasn't taken official visit there, but he's visited there.
Yeah. So, how much of it is committable? But then again, in the future, they're all going to be committable. Right. When the roster numbers start to come back. So I guess with him, you just hope for the best and whatever. But obviously to me, what happens with Yosei Epineza and Terrence Smith are what determines this class as being, pretty sound to, wow, this is a pretty good class. And, if there's one thing that I don't say bothers me, but there's one thing that kind of makes me shake my head a little bit is, his quarterback. And, again, we're not talking about the quarterback in this class. And it's kind of been that way for the last few years, Rob, where, they're kind of, I won't say an afterthought, but they kind of are. James Razor was that way. Marco Lainez was that way. Carson May was that way.
How much, Scott, do you think that's the prospect himself or the lack of success at the position at Iowa that make people skeptical?
I think
these aren't 5-star recruits. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They're not beating. But Sullivan had good offers too, and Reeser committed early, so you don't know, he may have had. I just wonder sometimes if these guys are being dinged for Iowa's lack of success at developing quarterbacks in the last decade.
That's certainly a possibility, no question. But
And that's not a knock on Nate Stanley. I think he did develop. He didn't reach maybe the heights that he could have, particularly in some of the more important games, but he still had a good career.
Nate was a great B-level quarterback in Big Ten. I mean, he had 68 touchdown passes. That's second all time in Iowa history. And it's like he ended his career 13th in Big Ten history in that category. But as you mentioned, there were key moments. And I think in his case, this slightly slow reaction time prevented him from being an all Big Ten quarterback. I mean, there were several times, and then he tried to use his arm strength to compensate for missing the opening when it was there, and then he overthrew guys a lot. And I think with Jimmy Sullivan, and I'm not criticizing him personally at all. I don't see anything negative, but he's at this point considered somewhere in the 60s as far as top quarterbacks coming out. That doesn't mean you can't be number one and maybe you win a Heisman or anything like that. But there's not as much hype, I guess, around him. And I feel like we felt that going all the way back until Deuce Hogan. It's really been that way, that, whether it's Joey Labus, during COVID, or Carson May coming out of COVID, or, Marco was a little bit a little higher profile, but not much. And then, James Reason, Alex Padilla before Deuce, and he got really overlooked because you had Spencer, who got some fair play, and then Deuce, who got massive amounts. Hell, I went to Texas to interview him and his family. So, so you have that. It's just, and again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Jimmy blows up this year and stuff, but you wonder, his previous offensive coaches who made these calls, they made them early, and it's like, all right, we got our guy, and we're happy about it. And who knows, maybe Ryan Fitzgerald, walk on, will come in and steal everybody's thunder.
Yeah, you never know development wise, right? It's just, you would like to see Iowa's quarterback recruit get a little bit more buzz from within the fan base, but there are always examples of guys like CJ Beathard, who he was kind of an afterthought in his class. Ken O'Keefe leaves. He's, all of the circumstances surrounding CJ, he wasn't supposed to be the guy, and then he turned out to be the guy. So Scott's not Scott, to emphasize what Scott is saying, he's not dumping on Jimmy Sullivan. Jimmy Sullivan could end up being CJ Beathard.
Yeah.
But on the front end here, there's just not much.
Yeah.
Juice.
Yeah. And it's unfair and unfortunate. And then you look at the depth chart now and who's there and what's going on. And it's like, you've gotten, 3 transfers are basically your top 3 spots, or 3 out of your top 4 spots. And, their development there has been sketchy at best. And
so is that the right path for Iowa, Scott? Or is the right path to maybe take some development projects out of high school and see what you can get? And then if they don't work, you hit the portal and do what they've been doing here. I mean, I'm not sure what it's such with the portal and NIL and all that stuff. Do you have time to develop quarterbacks these days?
Yes and no. I mean, really, it's an investment. It's going to be a financial investment as much as anything now, because let's say James Reaser has come in, and all of a sudden, wow, this guy's better than Brendan Sullivan. And he's our number 2. We're going to still redshirt him, but we're going to have him run a lot of 2 reps, in practice. And then next year he's going to battle for the starting gig. Well, that helps you out so much financially, kind of like drafting a good quarterback versus signing one as a free agent.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here. Because if
trying to win when that quarterback is on his first contract before he gets
exactly. It's like, winning with Zach Wilson versus signing Aaron Rodgers,
Thanks for sticking the knife in and turning it.
I mean, paying $4 million or $5 million versus 40. And
or Sam Darnold, or we can go down through the list of shitty Jets draft picks at quarterback.
Hey, my team has the worst history of them all. So
Yeah, but you got a good one now. Hopefully,
let's cross our fingers. But no, and that's kind of what the case with quarterback here is. If you can develop him within your system in their first 2 years, and then all of a sudden year 3 he's a starter, or year 2 even, and okay, this is awesome. He's moving in the right direction, and you kind of pay low, and then when he hits hits the mother load, then you pay then, rather than bringing in Cade McNamara, and
yeah.
And then you're kind of unproven. And then because you really don't, if you're Iowa, you don't really want to get into a food fight with a bunch of teams over a quarterback, especially now, because you're not going to win that. But even in a couple of years, even if the offense turns around, you still don't want to get in that situation. You want to develop your own. It's really important because that also shows potential quarterbacks coming in like, wow, you really haven't developed anybody. Can you develop me? Continue to push, because everybody wants to go to the NFL. And can you get me to the NFL? And right now the answer is, I don't know, but maybe Tim Lester changes that dynamic.
I mean, even programs like Notre Dame are trying to live in the transfer portal at that position, and it hasn't worked great for them.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Hartman was okay.
Yeah,
Riley Leonard, I think, is really good. He was from Duke, but I do think that this is you just don't want to live in that situation year after year because you're going to strike out.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a bad year.
Somebody Cade McNamara comes in, you put all your eggs in the basket, boom, he gets hurt, you're fucked.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And or they're just average. Or maybe they were okay at their previous because of the system or the league, or maybe they had a great receiver or something like that, and then they come to your team and then it's like, yeah, you're not that good, and then you don't have anybody beneath them because they transferred out too, and everybody strikes out in the transfer portal at quarterback once in a while, so you've got to make sure you have a guy that you can develop, and it also builds attachment, to your teammates.
Yep.
Your teammates want to, hey, I came in with this guy, and in year 3, we're all in this together. And of course, the fan base, and probably builds better, pure NIL opportunities.
And to put the bow on the quarterback conversation, I feel, and I'm not breaking news here, Iowa's better positioned at developing that position now with Tim Lester and John Budmeyer on the staff than it was with the previous people that were the previous quarterback coach, I will say.
Yeah.
I think there's more knowledge in the building now about that position and developing it than there was last year. Am I safe in saying that?
Yes. And the sad part is, Rob, that he could have done that. He could have been that way now with the new rule change with unlimited staff. That now it wouldn't have been a problem. So maybe Kirk will want to bring Brian back.
Yeah, you heard it here first on the Hotspot podcast from Scott Document. Brian Ferentz is coming back.
Yeah.
We'll have plenty more time to talk about recruiting here as we move into the next month. It is a dead period now for folks that don't know, meaning that there is recruiting slows down significantly for the next month. I think it runs June 24th to July 24th. So no visitors, any of that stuff going on.
Yeah.
So pretty quiet now. We got some women's basketball news, Scott, that doesn't relate to Caitlin Clark, Kate Martin, or
I got to interrupt you. Caitlin Clark was just named the Big Ten Women's Athlete of the Year this morning.
There you go. Just get that email?
Yep.
All right. Congratulations to Caitlin. She also won the Honda Award this week again as well. So she's got awards coming in for college as she's leading the resurgent Indiana Fever right now in the WNBA. They play tonight, I think, in Seattle.
They do, yeah.
Late game tonight. So mark your phones. Set the alarm. 9:00. Caitlin Clark.
Well, you got to watch the Aces before that. Split screen with the debate. So
okay, they're on earlier.
Yeah, they play Chicago.
So. Oh, okay, cool. Asia against
Angel Reese.
Asia and Angel.
Yeah.
That was a good game Sunday, by the way, between Chicago and Indiana. No drama, just really good basketball.
Yeah.
Nice win by the Sky. Fever still holds the 2-1 edge. I sense, I know that none of them want to admit it. I sense there is a budding rivalry there, and I hope it continues. I think it's good for the league.
Sure it is. Two recognizable faces that have faced off. I mean, Is it Magic Bird? Kind of, sort of. I think personality wise, it certainly plays into that. But style of play doesn't, of course. But I do think it's healthy. Anytime you have organic rivalries, it's healthy for any sport. And when they play and people are like, okay, they're playing, I got to watch this, and then they continue to set records every time they do that, it means it's there. It's just part of it. And it's like, who gave a shit about the Colts and Patriots playing one another until it was Brady and Manning, and then it was like, this is like the game circled. Every network was like, I want that game this year.
Yeah. Yeah, and both really fun to watch in their own way. Both really effective basketball players who I think will be staples of this league for years to come, and be kind of that story, the 30 for 30 or whatever, what raised the WNBA in the consciousness of America to the point where it's become more of a accepted sport, a sport that people gravitate towards and watch and embrace. And I think we're in the midst of that happening. Sometimes when you go through it, it's tough to realize it, like living through the Bird and Magic era, and where it took the NBA and the Jordan era and all that stuff we've lived through the years. So we're going through it in the WNBA, and it's really fun to watch. All right, Scott. In addition to that storyline in the Iowa women's basketball, new head coach Jan Jensen announced 2 additions to her staff yesterday on Wednesday, June the 26th. Randy Henderson and Sean Sullivan, both UI graduates. Henderson will serve as an assistant coach, while Sullivan will be an assistant coach / general manager. Not sure what that is yet, but we will get details on that. Many Iowa fans will remember Randy Henderson as Randy Peterson, prepped at Cedar Falls High School and then played here at Iowa back in the late 90s, early 2000s. She was part of the initial Lisa Bluter, Jan Jensen teams with Kara Consuegra and Lindsay Meter and Jenny Lillis and that crew. Really good teams, very fun teams to watch. And she's been in coaching pretty much since she stopped playing. She comes from Washington U, where she was the head coach, but she's had jobs pretty much throughout the years, has a lot of experience, and I think an excellent addition to the staff. I don't know as much about Sean Sullivan, but look forward to getting to know him and what he brings as well.
Yeah, and I'll start with him a little bit just because I read it in his background. I mean, he was a team manager for Iowa, so they got to know him and how he worked with the team. And I think you see that with a lot of really good minds, that they work with players and as student managers. And then, he moved all the way up to being, director of personnel and assistant coach at North Carolina. So he really worked his way up. And so that's a really good move for him. And then obviously I won't even, you covered the team when Randy Peterson / Henderson plays there, played at Iowa. And of course she was at for 9 years or something like that as the head coach, and been at Wash U down in St. Louis. Knows the system. I mean, and I think that's one thing that the continuity at Iowa is reinforced here with 2 people that really know. They've been there and they understand they not only understand the program, but they understand the system. So it's not going to be foreign to them to try to teach it. And I'm sure their stops have helped them learn a couple of different things. I think these are, really good moves. I certainly would not poo-poo any move just because I would be, it would be ridiculous for me to try to say, oh, that was terrible to hire her, but I do, so I trust everybody's opinion on this, and certainly Jan's way more than mine. So I do think that continuing to build that continuity is really important.
And you got, Abby Stamp, formerly Abby Emery, also a player for, during the Lisa Bluter Jan Jensen partnership through the years. So a lot of continuity there. Randy also worked with Kara Consuegra at Charlotte as an assistant coach.
Yeah.
Consuegra is now the head coach at Marquette. So good things happening for former Iowa players in their coaching. And I think this hire makes sense also when you look at it from the perspective, Scott, of Jan is the post whisperer, and and she still will be involved in that, but she's got a lot more responsibilities as the head coach. Randy Peterson was at a successful Randy Henderson, excuse me. I knew I made it all the way to the end of the conversation.
I was waiting for you to do that.
But she was a effective post in the Big Ten, understands the position. She can work with Jan. She knows what Jan wants from her post players. It just seems seamless.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a real help. And then of course, Jan can really, step in if needed, kind of like Kirk with the offensive line, that, hey, she oversees everything, but she can really work with that. And I'm sure recruiting philosophy works here well too. Maybe the most underrated person associated with Iowa women's basketball for the last few years for sure is Abby Emmert Stamp. She's been tremendous in every single aspect of this. And I've heard that from the national level where people are like, yeah, she could be a head coach, pretty soon. And I don't know if they've elevated her or if they're going to or not, but that would be a move I would consider making because she's been a really strong assistant coach, and I don't want to dismiss Raina Harmon either. She's been.
Tania Davis is another former player back on the staff now too. So you got Tania Davis,
yeah,
Abby, and Randy all played here.
Right. So, and you look at not only the consistency and stability of the coaching staff and the support staff, but it's enabled the playing staff to be that way, to feel like even though Lisa was kind of the den mother in some ways, and maybe she felt like that to the public, and it's going to be different and difficult at times for people to kind of notice that, to go through that. But I think they've done a nice job of kind of moving, in that direction. I really like these moves. I like the fact that they've kept the, everybody stayed. They could have left. Yep. And it wouldn't have made, and you could have seen some of these players leaving for more lucrative opportunities. And instead they're all bought in. And I think it says a lot about Iowa and the consistency and having Lucy Olson. And I don't know, watching some of their Instagram videos and stuff. I mean, they're having just as much fun now as they ever did before. And it's a good time to turn over a new page. I mean, because they are missing in my opinion, the greatest athlete in University of Iowa history, Caitlin Clark.
And arguably the greatest coach, or one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And Lisa Bluter, just the all-time winningest women's basketball coach in Big Ten history, and I think second in wins, maybe behind Izzo and Bobby Knight in basketball period for the Big Ten. So it's either her or Jean Cady or third. They're really close, but anyway, I'm really impressed with how they've handled this, because this could have been a very difficult situation, and this is why you needed the athletic director in place that you have. She's the one that really helped put it in motion, and then the people she valued executed the plan.
And it seems like everything is in good hands with the women's basketball program. Obviously, they have to go out on the court and do it, and they're following a tough act, as we just talked about with Caitlin and Lisa leaving, and Jan and Lucy Olson kind of being the two that are replacing those two. Yeah. So keep your perspective, keep your expectations where they realistic, but the program is healthy and in great shape. Just don't expect back-to-back national championship games coming up in the next 2 years. That was special, but this is still a really, really healthy program at Iowa. And
I think there's a lot of brand loyalty. I think there's, Iowa's always had like a solid 5,000 fans that were just always, they'll support them, whether they win the Big Ten or they're eighth or something like that. But I think that they've grown the game to the point where there are a lot of fans who are like, I'm going to still buy these tickets. I know we're not going to go win the national championship or even probably get to the Final Four, or maybe not even the Sweet 16 this year, or maybe we will, but they love the people that are involved. They're loyal now, and it's probably more so than the other sports, certainly men's basketball and probably football. And I think that's, and in some ways that's going to be healthy for the team, because I won't say that there were bandwagon fans, but there were that jumped on because of the success. And then they're going to kind of, yeah, I'm not going to pay attention now. It's probably good because a lot of those people are the ones that complain the most. now they don't have to hear it. It's like, well, or they'll parachute in with a complaint or two, and that'll be about it.
Yeah, and if you look at it from a value standpoint, Scott, I mean, the entertainment you get from going to Carver and watching a women's basketball game, whether Caitlin Clark is there or not, for the amount that you spend comparatively anymore with the cost of everything going up, it's pretty good value for your buck.
It is, no question. And again, and it's what I've enjoyed about covering women's basketball, and this isn't just recent, but this is historically, especially under Bluter, is it's such a positive audience. That they truly get into the players. They like the players. They want to see them succeed. And if they lose, it's not this, we got to start firing people. We got to start doing this. I mean, it's just, the knee-jerk reactions we get in football and men's basketball, you just don't get in women's basketball. And
now that women's basketball popularity is rising, we're starting to see some of the same horse shit we see in men's basketball and football when it comes to people complaining, right? We're seeing it on the WNBA level. We saw it at the college basketball level as this season went on with some of the nonsense, because we got towards the end of the college season and we're here, it's the Cheryl Swoop stuff and all that happy horse shit.
Yeah. We don't need any of that, but it's coming, and I mean, it is at a healthy pace right now. And will it be as well attended or whatever as what we saw with the men's, or with the tournament this year? I don't know. I think Iowa, I think the number that's safe for Iowa is like 80%. If you can get 80% of your attendance, first of all, that's incredible comparative to the past. But I think that shows that there is still not only growth, but I think there is still an excitement that's attached to this, despite losing again, the greatest women's basketball player in Big Ten history, and maybe in women's basketball history.
I think the comparison, Scott, or what I'm going to keep an eye on is where the women's attendance is compared to the men's basketball attendance. Because the women passed them last year, at least in action, like people going to the games and ticket sales. And where does that land? Like regularly, when there's not the greatest player in the game on your team, where does it settle?
Yeah.
And some of that has to do with where the men's basketball program goes, obviously.
Right. And obviously we can go into great detail on a lot of these things, but
let's not.
Let's not.
That's just kind of the measuring that I'm looking at going forward here is where does this settle?
And part of me thinks, like with men's basketball, they're going to play 3 games at neutral sites, and their tournament is, South Dakota is the signature team that they're playing in their exempt tournament, and they're going to struggle early when it comes to, now when they get into Big Ten, things may change a little bit. They do have a showcase player in Peyton Sanford that, will be one of the 8 to 10 best players in the Big Ten, if not maybe a top 5 player in the Big Ten. So they do have some marketability there that maybe was overshadowed last year, but I think the program either A, doesn't care, B, completely underestimates the value of having quality non-conference games at home. And I think other than having, Iowa State, it's just, people want to see stuff, and you just can't just expect them to go, I can't, and I'm just going to support the team, so I'm going to go out and watch them play Maryland Eastern Shore. It just doesn't work that way anymore. They'd rather stay home.
Yeah, I think that's a college basketball problem, I should say, in addition to an Iowa problem, is the home scheduling and these exempt tournaments. And a lot of the stuff they're doing now is decreasing attendance across the country. And I think they need to fix that. And I'm looking more at a window of maybe the next 5 years where the women's basketball attendance goes and the men's basketball attendance goes, and kind of where it settles in. But we'll see. Plenty of time to talk basketball moving forward. But football season is next. And as we talked about at the top of the podcast, when we talk to you next week, we'll be in July already, which is crazy. And we'll continue to talk about the football season as it approaches. And I'm sure we'll have some type of news next week. We always do. There are no slow times anymore
Yeah,
when covering college athletics.
no kidding, so yeah, I'm excited. Next week's 4th of July, Rob, next Thursday. So we'll have to figure out a different day, I suppose. I don't know if we want
Yep.
to,
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to celebrate independence with us.
they can turn on their YouTube while they're grilling their hot dogs or getting their sparklers ready or whatever. But
We'll figure it out. Who knows? Maybe we'll do a morning July 4th show. We'll see how
yeah,
it goes. But I'll let you guys know via Twitter, X, whatever it's called these days, what the plan is for next week. But yeah, we'll be back to talk to you at some point next week, and we'll have plenty to talk about. We'll frame it that way. But appreciate everybody for listening. Yeah. Anything coming up on the athletic you want to promote, Scott? I know you're the national guy now,
yeah.
so I don't know how much local stuff you're working on.
Yeah, I'm working on a fairly detailed story right now on I got this mosquito that flew on my laptop. A fairly detailed story on Maryland, its 10th anniversary. So yesterday I talked to Wallace Lowe, who was the former president when they all went down. I talked to Mike Locksley. I talked to the current president and just kind of what Maryland brings to the Big Ten, what they need to do. So I know that's not Iowa related, but it is pretty. Yeah, it is. I mean, Wallace Lowe really kind of spilled his guts on a lot of stuff that went on that he really didn't talk about. Like he had to have round the clock protection because Maryland, and he said, look, he's like, I'm a Chinese American and I moved to a state that's half Southern, half Northern. It was that way in the Civil War. And it's that way today. Yeah. And people were going, were incensed that they would leave that historic league to go to another league, go from a Southern league to a Northern league. And they were really upset about it. And so he's like, now I'm an honorary member of the University of Maryland Police Department because, they sent his wife away for a month to get away just because they weren't sure. And I'm like, did you ever feel threatened? He says, no, but it felt like anything could happen. So just really fascinating. And then the development and how much money they got from the Big Ten free or forgiven, which was, I wasn't really aware of. And so that's, it's a really intriguing, different story of the realignment that we saw with Nebraska. Rutgers got a lottery ticket. Nebraska was kind of like excited. Maryland was different. It was just not as embraced. But they have brought a lot of value to the league that is not really, because it's not football. It's not readily apparent.
Yeah. Look forward to reading that. I'm always interested in all things Big Ten, so I will give that a read. And you folks should too. And we'll be back to talk next week about some more Hawkeye-centric news and conversation. Want to thank our sponsors for helping us support this podcast and bring it to you guys. And thank you all for listening. We had a little argument and fighting going on in the chat room today. We do not approve of that. But there's messages being retracted in there and people being unruly. So get it together, people. It's college sports. All right. No need to fight. Anyway, have a good weekend. Enjoy the rest of your week. And Scott and I will be back to talk to you next week on the Hawk Fanatic Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.